Good morning everybody. In this video I want to talk to you about difficulty in fighting games and in Tekken specifically. It's a very important topic. Tekken is often referred to as one of the most difficult video games you could possibly get yourself into, and so I think that's a huge mental factor for people who are struggling with the game right now or who are thinking about maybe getting into fighting games or getting into Tekken for the first time. And so I want to crystallize my thoughts on the topic in this video. So how hard is Tekken? Well, the short answer to that question is very. And that's really the most interesting thing you could say about it without comparing it to other video games. You should be aware that even within the family of fighting games, which are already considered to be very difficult, Tekken is considered to be near the top in terms of how difficult it is to get into technically. And I think I could really leave it at that in terms of how hard Tekken is, and what I would like to talk about instead is how Tekken is hard. Why is it considered to be so difficult, and maybe try and give you some, mental agility in terms of how to think about that issue. First of all, fighting games in general, why are they difficult? I thought a lot about this yesterday, and I had two main things that came to mind. The first one is that for fighting games to remain competitively interesting all the way through all levels of competitive play, they basically need to push human beings to the limits of human reaction time. So what do I mean by that? It's probably easiest with a couple of examples. So in Tekken, for example, we have throws and we have seeable lows is a good example. Seeable lows are lows that you could theoretically react to visually and block, and when you are able to do that, you can usually punish your opponent for a lot of damage. If that was something that you could reliably do every single time, then seeable lows would become a complete non-factor at high levels of competitive play, because all players would be able to do it all the time, and so it would just be very, very risky and completely destructive to use one of those moves. That's not what happens. Seeable lows remain a factor at all levels of play simply because of the fact that while it is possible to react to them visually, it is very hard. And so if you are in that moment of focus and you're able to do it correctly, then yes, you're going to be able to capitalize and get damage. But every single time your opponent is able to sneak in that move and it does not get blocked, they are the ones who get the damage. And so if you contrast that with a game like, I think a good example would be like Hearthstone, which is like the most, I think, popular competitive video game in the world, more or less. The equivalent of Hearthstone, which is a turn-based game, would be if your opponent does a C below, the game screen pauses and then says, your opponent just did a C below, how would you like to react? And obviously you would select, I would like to block this low and launch my opponent or crush it somehow. And then the reaction time and focus aspect of competitive fighting games would go completely out the window. And so that's why they are much more difficult than a game like that to get into. There's a focus element and an element of you constantly trying to be the best you can be that keeps you on your toes constantly when you play fighting games. The other main thing, aside from reaction time, that came to my mind is that a legacy skill and the fact that you're going into a community of people who are extremely good already is a huge factor in fighting games, and I think it's more important in fighting games than in other genres of video game. Fighting games tend to have a crowd that love their specific fighting game and that play it over all of these years, and then gradually people come in kind of slowly. They don't really explode onto the market, there are not that many new franchises that pop up and become huge. It's more about people who love this fighting game and who are very, very good at it already, and then when a new entry in the series comes out, the community absorbs a couple of more people and grows a little bit. But all of those new people who are trying to join the community have to deal with the fact that they are trying to play against people who might already have 10 years or more experience of playing the game competitively. And that's true at all levels of competition. When you're at a low rank and you're trying to get better, maybe you get a little bit better, but now you're playing at a level where people are just stronger again. And so it doesn't really get easier, you just get better relative to yourself, but the environment that you're playing in is going to remain difficult even if you're playing in the purple ranks. So that's another reason I think fighting games are so difficult. Next, I want to talk about Tekken specifically, and I thought a lot about this as well, and I came to the conclusion that I think Tekken is difficult in two main ways. There are two very distinct categories of difficulty when you are playing Applied Tekken, and I think you need to think about them a little bit differently, and so I want to talk about them now. The first one I'm going to refer to as execution difficulty. Execution difficulty refers to difficult things you have to do with your hands. This is related to spending a lot of time in practice mode and committing things to muscle memory. Execution difficulty is a huge factor because even if you are able to make very good decisions and you're maybe a more knowledgeable player than your opponent, if you're not able to capitalize and execute in the way you want to when opportunities present themselves, then your opponent is just going to outdamage you in the long run, even if they are just, using repeatable, cheap stuff. It's also going to limit you in terms of what characters you can play, and it's going to change the way you need to learn how to play characters. And this is a huge factor. I've put two examples of characters that I think are high in execution difficulty in this game. You could obviously put characters like the traditional Mishimas in this category as well. I think a good way to think about this is take, for example, a character like Brian. This is a little bit of a controversial opinion of mine, but I happen to think that Brian is an exceptionally low execution character. I think he's extremely easy to use effectively in this game. And when I say that, people usually go, well, what about taunt cancel into perfect jet upper? That is difficult to do, yes, but is it really a required strategy in order to be successful with Brian? Think about the last 10 games you played against a Brian. Think about the last 10 competitive tournament games you saw where there was a Brian player. Was taunt cancel into perfect jet upper really the strategy, the defining thing that allowed the Brian player to excel? It was probably just the fact that they were doing a lot of mock kicks and a lot of orbitals, which are extremely easy to do but very, very good and powerful moves. If you contrast that with something like a Mishima, if you want to play them effectively at a pretty high level, you need to get good at stuff at like sidestepping into a very clutch electric. That is both difficult to do and an important strategy if you want to be successful with that type of character. And so that's how I think in terms of like what characters are execution heavy or not. Do you actually need to do execution heavy stuff in order to be able to play them at their sort of base level good play style, at an above casual level? The other type of difficulty that I want to talk about that I think is separate from execution difficulty in Tekken, I'm going to refer to as strategic difficulty. I've put two different characters here because I think these two characters are examples of characters that might not be super difficult in terms of executing. They're not necessarily very easy. I don't think Tekken is ever easy, so to speak, but this is more about characters that have very situational moves and large complex move pools. Strategic difficulty is much more about you being able to make decisions, and so this is a lot less about spending time in practice mode, committing stuff to muscle memory in your hands, and about accumulating a bank of knowledge and making difficult decisions with your brain. So we've got basically hand difficulty and brain difficulty if you want to be really sort of blunt about these two categories. Strategic difficulty, and the main way to improve in this way is actually to just spend a lot of time playing the game and spending a lot of time trying to learn and be constructive about the game. I've said in previous videos that I think Tekken is a lot about living in many different specific situations. And the thing about Tekken is, like I said earlier, you're pushing yourself to the limits of human reaction time, meaning that situation where you need to make your decision changes several times every single second. Specifically true for Tekken because when you're in a situation in Tekken, you have so many different options in terms of what you could do next. You have like 10 to 20 different basic movement options you could use. You have a move list of about 100 moves that have several numbers with their frame data, and then you have your opponent's character and that entire move list to consider as well. So making complex decisions and applying an effective strategy and effective decision making is a type of difficulty in Tekken that I think is not necessarily related to execution difficulty, but these two things combine to make Tekken such a difficult game to be good at and to perform technically. The next thing I want to talk about here is sort of randomness and why it becomes so frustrating and difficult to play Tekken online, even at a low rank. So if you're taking these two categories of difficulty and you're trying to combine them into effective Tekken play, but you are playing against a character or another player, I should say, who does not want to work on these two different types of difficulty. They prefer to randomly throw out very powerful moves, preferably that have a lot of crush properties, because when they connect randomly, which they do a lot because of the fast-paced nature of the game, it feels really good and it feels like they're being good at the game and that they're being successful. Demolition Men, random hop kicks, lightning screw, Matterhorn, blockable low launchers like Snake Edge. You see a lot of this, especially at low ranks, and it can really hurt you and hurt you like in your soul and mentally when you're trying so hard to do these difficult things and you're being crushed by an opponent who is really just gambling on powerful moves and relying on the fact that that the game changes so fast and that there are so many different situations that if you just stick out these moves, you're gonna connect with them a lot of the time, and then you can capitalize and get damage. Even when you do block some of these like random things that your opponent will just do, you now have to actually execute proper responses. If it's something that is sidesteppable, you have to time that sidestep perfectly. If it is something that is punishable, you need to know what kind of punisher you want to apply, and you need to time that well. All of that is very difficult, but if you are able to do it and if you decide to work on it, then that's going to help you in the long run. This is what I always say. I think playing a character where you're just trying to do powerful moves randomly and looking for damage, it's the equivalent of like getting fast food or eating a lot of candy when you know that you should that you would probably feel a lot better and it would probably be a lot better for you in the long run if you ate something healthy. But it's this carnal need to feed yourself or just do damage right now and just like beat an opponent, try and feel a little bit better about yourself and then moving on. And I think that's ultimately, unless you really enjoy it and you don't care if you never leave green ranks or never leave yellow ranks, if you don't care about ever getting seriously good and you have a lot of fun just playing at that level, then fine, do that. But ultimately, in my opinion, it's a waste of your time. And you should try and spend time at improving your decision making and your bank of knowledge, and you should spend your time trying to execute more difficult techniques with your fingers, especially if you're playing a character that requires that in order to be successful. And if you're able to do that, I happen to think that Tekken is probably the most rewarding gaming experience you can have. It's my favorite fighting game and my favorite video game series probably of all time. And when you are able to, despite all of the things that I've talked about today, actually play some seriously good Tekken, and you've spent a lot of time bringing yourself to that point that you see improvement, it is so incredibly rewarding and so much fun that it is not even comparable to spamming and gambling when you're playing. And that is exactly why I think you should definitely start playing Tekken if you're not already, and you should continue playing Tekken if you're playing Tekken already. It is one of the most fun gaming experiences you could possibly have when all of these things come together. It really becomes pretty magical, in my opinion. So that's going to wrap up my little discussion about difficulty in fighting games and in Tekken. I hope it answered a lot of the questions you have. I bet you have a lot of opinions of your own that you would like to share, so feel free to use the comment section. And the next week I'm going to be making some more gameplay videos for you guys with some commentary, because I know you've been asking for that and you love those videos. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.